47 missed calls. That's how many times the hospital tried reaching my mother while I was coding blue, heart-stopped machines screaming. She never answered. She was busy champagne raised at my brother's $25,000 birthday party while doctors fought to restart my heart. 4 days later, she appeared. Her first words, "Why didn't you call sooner?" 10 years passed. Then Ryan's kidneys failed. There she was kneeling at my door. Mascara running, "Please, Beho, don't do this to me." She didn't know what I'd just found in my father's belongings. Have you ever held someone's life in hands they once abandoned? The stories on this channel are created solely for entertainment, educational, and storytelling purposes. While some stories are inspired by real situations submitted by viewers via email, most details have been fictionalized, combined, or altered. My name is Allison Summers. I'm 35 years old, a senior software engineer at a tech company in Seattle, and I own a small house I bought with money I earned myself. To most people, I look like a success story. But success built on invisible wounds is just survival dressed up in better clothes. I learned early that being the easy child meant being the forgotten one. My father died when I was 12, my brother Ryan, 17. At the funeral, Ryan sobbed in my mother's arms for an hour straight. I stood alone beside the casket, eyes dry, hands clasped, watching everyone gather around him like he was the one in the ground. I had already learned the unspoken rule of our family: if you cry, people hold you. If you don't, people leave. Afterward, my Aunt Patricia put her hand on my mother's shoulder and said, "Ryan is taking it so hard, but look at Allison, she's so strong." My mother nodded, her eyes still on Ryan. She's always been the strong one. That was the day strong stopped being a compliment. It became permission. Permission for everyone to stop checking on me, stop worrying, stop seeing me at all. I was 12 years old, and I had just become invisible. 13 years later, that invisibility nearly killed me. I was 25, working 70-hour weeks at my first real tech job, trying to prove I belonged. I ignored the cough that wouldn't go away, the fever that kept climbing, the heaviness in my chest that made breathing feel like labor. I was strong. I could push through. That's what strong people did. Then I collapsed on my kitchen floor. My neighbor heard the fall through the thin apartment walls and called 911. By the time the paramedics arrived, my lips were blue, severe pneumonia with cardiac complications. That's what the doctors told me later. In the ICU, my heart stopped for 94 seconds. Coding blue, defibrillators, chest compressions. They put me in a medically induced coma while machines breathed for me. The hospital called my emergency contact 47 times over 8 hours. My mother was at an upscale restaurant in Portland. Ryan's 30th birthday, a party she'd spent months planning, $25,000, making sure her golden child felt celebrated. When her phone buzzed with the hospital's number, she stepped away from the table and answered. I know what she said because a nurse told me later, her voice careful, her eyes full of something that looked like pity. The nurse told her I was in critical condition. My mother asked if it was life or death if she needed to come right now. The nurse said it was serious, that family should be there. My mother said she was in the middle of something important, her son's birthday, and asked if she could come in the morning. Then she hung up, silenced her phone, and returned to the champagne toast. 46 more calls. She didn't answer a single one. I woke up 3 days later to an empty room. No family, no flowers. Just a nurse named Margaret holding my hand, her grip warm and steady. There you are, she said softly. You scared us for a while. My family, I managed. Your mother called this morning. She said she's coming this afternoon. This afternoon. 3 days after my heart stopped beating. My mother arrived at 4 o'clock with grocery store flowers wrapped in plastic. She walked in, set them on the bedside table, and looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. Why didn't you call me sooner, she said. I had to hear from Aunt Patricia that you were even in the hospital. I stared at her. The hospital called you 47 times. Her face flickered just for a moment before settling into practiced confusion. No, they must have had the wrong number. I never got any calls. My mother's phone number hasn't changed in 30 years. In that moment, something shifted inside me. A door I hadn't known existed cracked open, and behind it was a question I'd spent my whole life avoiding. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't a mistake. This was a choice, and I was beginning to realize it might not have been the first one. The hospital bill arrived 6 weeks after I was discharged. $52,000. Insurance covered part of it, but the rest sat on my kitchen table like a death sentence of a different kind. I stared at that number for hours, calculating how many years of payments it would take, how many sacrifices, how many meals skipped and luxuries abandoned. I was 25 years old, barely making enough to cover rent, and I owed more money than I had ever seen in my life because my heart had stopped beating while my mother sipped champagne. I asked her for help once, just once. I called on a Sunday afternoon, my voice steady, even though my hands were shaking. I explained the situation, the payment plan I was trying to negotiate, the interest that kept climbing. I didn't beg. I simply asked if she could help me with any of it. Her response came without hesitation. "Sweetheart, I wish I could, but Ryan's business needs investment right now, and I just don't have anything extra." Ryan's business, his third failed venture in 5 years. Another restaurant that would close within 18 months, another dream funded entirely by our mother, while I drowned in medical debt from nearly dying alone. She had money for his failures, but nothing for my survival. That was the last time I asked her for anything. I moved to Seattle 8 months later. New city, new job, new life. I told myself it was for career opportunities, and that was partly true, but mostly I needed distance. I needed to exist somewhere my mother's shadow couldn't reach, somewhere I could build something that belonged only to me. The work saved me. I threw myself into it with the same intensity that had landed me in the ICU, but this time I was smarter about it. I learned to pace myself, to rest, to recognize when my body was warning me to slow down. I got promoted twice in 3 years. Senior engineer by 30. I bought my small house at 32, signing the mortgage papers with hands that didn't shake at all. Every payment was mine. Every success was mine. Nothing could be taken because nothing had been given. I didn't cut my family off completely. That would have required a confrontation. I wasn't ready for explanations I didn't want to give. Instead, I just slowly disappeared. The first 2 years after the ICU, I went home twice annually, still hoping for something I couldn't name. Maybe an apology, maybe acknowledgement. Maybe just a moment where my mother looked at me and actually saw me standing there. It never came. Years 3 through 5. I reduced my visits to Christmas, only arriving late and leaving early, sleeping in hotels instead of my childhood bedroom. By year 6, even that felt like too much. Phone calls replaced visits, brief surface-level conversations about weather and work and nothing that mattered. I told myself I was protecting myself, and I was. But there was another truth underneath that one, harder to admit. Part of me kept going back because I still couldn't accept what I knew. Somewhere deep inside, in the place where 12-year-old Allison still stood alone at her father's casket, I kept believing that if I just tried hard enough, if I was successful enough, strong enough, present enough, my mother would finally see me. She would finally choose me. She never did. The first crack in my carefully constructed distance came at my cousin Michelle's wedding 7 years after the ICU. I flew to Portland for the ceremony, planning to stay exactly 24 hours. At the reception, Aunt Patricia found me near the dessert table. She pulled me into a warm hug, the kind that lingered, and when she pulled back, her eyes were soft with concern. "I'm so glad you're okay, honey. We were all so worried when the hospital couldn't reach your mother. Losing her phone number like that, what terrible timing." I froze. The champagne glass in my hand suddenly felt very heavy. "What did you say?" Patricia's brow furrowed slightly. "The hospital. When you were in the ICU? Your mother said they had the wrong number in their system, some kind of clerical error. By the time they tracked her down through family, you were already awake." She felt terrible about it. The room tilted. I set my glass down carefully, afraid I might drop it. My mother hadn't just ignored 47 calls. She hadn't just lied to my face in that hospital room. She had constructed an entire narrative and spread it to everyone who might ask questions. The hospital's mistake. Linda, the worried mother who came as soon as she knew. A story that painted her as a victim of circumstance rather than the architect of my abandonment. The lie wasn't a moment of panic. It was a campaign. I smiled at Patricia, made some excuse about needing air, and walked out to the parking lot where I sat in my rental car for an hour, just breathing. The second discovery came 2 days later. My mother was selling the family home, downsizing to an apartment. The real reason, which I learned through family gossip, was that she needed to cover Ryan's latest round of debts. Again. She asked if I could help pack up the garage, and I agreed because refusing would have required an explanation I wasn't ready to give. In the garage, buried among boxes of old holiday decorations, and forgotten furniture, I found a filing cabinet full of records. Tax returns, bank statements, legal documents going back decades. I wasn't looking for anything specific, but my hands seemed to know what they were doing as they flipped through yellowed papers and faded receipts. The bank statement was near the bottom of a folder labeled Trust Accounts. My father's name was on the account, so was mine. And there in black and white was a withdrawal for $25,000 dated 2 months before my 25th birthday. The memo line read, "Party expenses, Ryan." My hands started to shake. I remembered asking about that trust fund after the ICU, desperate and drowning in medical bills. I remembered my mother's face, sympathetic and sad, as she told me my father's life insurance had barely covered funeral costs. There was nothing left for trust funds, sweetheart. I'm sorry, $25,000. My father had left it for me, probably hoping it would help me start my adult life, maybe buy a car, or put a down payment on an apartment. My mother had taken it and used it to throw a birthday party for my brother, the same party she had chosen over my life. And when I begged for help paying the bills from nearly dying, she looked me in the eye and told me the money had never existed. I photographed the document with my phone. Then I put it back exactly where I found it, in the same folder, in the same position. I had learned by then that some truths don't need to be spoken out loud. They just need to be documented, remembered, kept safe for the day they become necessary. 3 more years passed. I built my life in Seattle brick by careful brick. I told myself I had moved on, that the distance I had created was enough, that I didn't need closure or confrontation or any of the things therapists talk about. I was fine. I was strong. I had survived. Then on an ordinary Tuesday morning, my phone rang. My mother's name on the screen. I almost didn't answer. I wish I hadn't. Her voice was shaking in a way I had never heard before. "It's Ryan. His kidneys are failing. The doctors say he needs a transplant within 6 months, or he'll be on dialysis for the rest of his life." I waited, knowing what was coming. "We've all been tested. No one matches." A long pause. "Except you. You're his only hope, Allison. Please." The woman who let me die was asking me to save my brother's life. I didn't answer her right away. I let the silence stretch across the phone line until it became unbearable, until I could hear her breathing grow shallow with desperation. Then I said I needed time to think, and I hung up before she could say another word. For the next week, I functioned on autopilot, going to work, eating meals I didn't taste, lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling while my mind played the same questions over and over. My brother was dying. The brother who had been chosen over me at every turn, who had received every dollar and every moment of attention while I stood invisible in the corner. Now his body was failing him, and somehow, impossibly, I was the only one who could save him. I learned the full picture through a series of phone calls with relatives who suddenly remembered I existed. Ryan's kidneys hadn't failed from alcohol alone, though 30 years of heavy drinking certainly hadn't helped. It was the combination of everything he had ignored for decades. Uncontrolled type 2 diabetes that he refused to manage because testing his blood sugar was inconvenient. Hypertension that went untreated because he didn't like how the medication made him feel. His doctor had warned him 5 years ago that if he didn't change his lifestyle, there would be consequences. Ryan hadn't changed. He had continued drinking, continued eating whatever he wanted, continued living as though his body would forgive him forever. And now his kidneys had simply given up. End-stage renal failure. Without a transplant, he faced dialysis 3 times a week for the rest of his life, however long that might be. The family had all been tested. Ryan's blood type was B negative, rare enough that finding a match was difficult. My mother, 67 years old with her own health problems, had been ruled out immediately. Extended family members were tested one by one, and one by one they came back incompatible. That left me, the daughter who had been forgotten, ignored, lied to, stolen from. The only viable living donor in the entire family. 1 week after that phone call, my mother appeared at my door. She didn't call ahead, didn't ask if it was a good time. She just showed up on a rainy Thursday evening, standing on my front porch like a stranger asking for directions. When I opened the door, I barely recognized her. She looked diminished somehow, smaller than I remembered, as though the weight of what she had come to ask had physically compressed her. She seemed 20 years older than the last time I had seen her in person. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside without a word. She walked into my living room, her eyes taking in the space I had built for myself, the home I had earned with no help from anyone. I made tea because I needed something to do with my hands, something to delay the conversation I knew was coming. We sat across from each other, cups warming our palms, and I watched her try to find the right words to begin her pitch. I didn't give her the chance. When was the last time you called me before Ryan got sick? She opened her mouth, then closed it again. I'll tell you, I said. 14 months ago, Christmas, a 2-minute call. You asked if I was coming home for the holidays. I said I couldn't get away from work. You said, okay, well, Merry Christmas, and hung up. That was it. 2 minutes. 14 months ago. Allison, 14 months. That's how long I didn't exist to you, until you needed something. Brr. The words landed exactly where I intended them to, and I watched her flinch as though I had struck her. In that moment, I finally understood something I had been circling around for years. I wasn't her daughter. I was her insurance policy, filed away and forgotten, kept in a drawer somewhere in case of emergency, only to be retrieved when she needed to cash me in. Her composure began to crack. I could see it happening in real time, the carefully constructed facade crumbling piece by piece. Her hands trembled around her teacup. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was barely above a whisper. I know things haven't been. She couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't find the words to summarize 3 decades of choosing Ryan over me. He's dying. He's my son. Please? I set my tea down carefully on the coffee table, giving myself a moment to steady my own voice. Before I consider anything, I need the truth. Not the version you told Aunt Patricia. Not the story about the hospital losing your phone number. The real truth about what happened. What do you mean? The ICU, 10 years ago, 47 calls. Tell me what actually happened that night. Silence filled the room. I let it sit there, let it grow heavy and uncomfortable, let her feel the weight of what I was asking. I need to hear you say it. And then finally she broke. I answered the first call. Her voice cracked on the words. The nurse said you were in critical condition, but you were always so strong, Allison. You never needed anyone. And it was Ryan's 30th birthday, the party I had been planning for months. I thought you would be fine. You were always fine. And the money? I asked, keeping my voice steady, even though my heart was pounding. The $25,000 Dad left me. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with something that looked like fear. She hadn't expected me to know about that. You used it for that party. Then you looked me in the eye and told me there was no trust fund. You didn't need it, she said. And even now, even in this moment of supposed honesty, she was reaching for justification. You were doing fine. Ryan was struggling. I was drowning in medical debt. From almost dying. Alone. For the first time in my life, I watched my mother have no answer. No excuse, no spin, no narrative she could construct to make herself the victim. Just the bare truth sitting between us, ugly and undeniable. I let the silence stretch for a long moment before I spoke again. I'll get tested to confirm the match, but a match doesn't mean a yes. That's my decision, and I'll make it on my own terms. Before I decide anything, there are conditions. Anything. The word came out desperate, immediate. First, you tell the family the truth. All of it. The ICU calls you ignored, the money you stole, everything you just told me, you tell them. No more lies, no more stories about hospital mistakes. Allison, please. Second, I hear from Ryan directly, not through you. He's 40 years old. If he wants my kidney, he can pick up the phone and ask me himself. She nodded, tears beginning to spill down her cheeks. What else? I paused, watching her face carefully as I made my final demand. I want access to Dad's things. All the boxes you have in storage. Everything. Something flickered across her expression that I couldn't quite identify. Not guilt, not sadness, fear, pure unmistakable fear. Why? Because I'm starting to realize the ICU wasn't the beginning of this, and I want to know what else you've hidden from me. She agreed to everything. Too quickly, I thought. Too easily. But I noticed how her hands trembled when I mentioned my father's boxes, how her eyes darted away from mine for just a second too long. She was afraid, not of confessing to the family, not of the humiliation that would follow. Something else. Something in those boxes that she had kept hidden for over 2 decades. 23 years of being erased from my own family. I was finally about to find out how deep it went. 2 weeks later, I arranged the video call myself. I sent the invitation, set the time, and waited in my living room with my laptop open, while the faces appeared one by one on my screen. my mother looking gray and hollow. Aunt Patricia concern etched into every line of her face. Uncle Robert, my father's brother, sitting stiffly in his home office. 3 cousins, including Michelle, all wearing expressions of confused curiosity. Everyone who had spent 10 years believing the hospital had lost my mother's phone number. Everyone who had accepted the story without question. I didn't speak. I simply waited, my camera on my face neutral, while my mother sat in her small apartment and prepared to dismantle 23 years of carefully constructed lies. She began slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. The 47 calls from the hospital. The first one she had answered and dismissed because it was Ryan's birthday. Because I was always strong, because she convinced herself I would be fine. The party she chose over her daughter's life. The lie she told everyone afterward, the fiction about hospital errors and wrong numbers that she had maintained for a decade. And then the money. The $25,000 my father had left for me, withdrawn and spent on Ryan's 30th birthday celebration, while I lay in a coma 300 miles away. 15 minutes of confession. I watched the faces on my screen shift from confusion to disbelief to something that looked like horror. Aunt Patricia's hand flew to her mouth. Uncle Robert's jaw tightened until I could see the muscles working beneath his skin. You took her money, Patricia's voice cracked. David's money, the money he left specifically for her. Mom, did you know about this? Michelle asked, turning to Patricia with wide eyes. Uncle Robert spoke quietly, but his words carried the weight of judgment. Linda, how could you? I watched my mother shrink before my eyes. Not from remorse, I realized. I wasn't sure she was capable of genuine remorse. She was shrinking from exposure. The image she had built so carefully for so long, the sacrificing mother who gave everything for her children, was collapsing in real time. And there was nowhere left for her to hide. The call ended with awkward silences and promises to talk soon. I closed my laptop and sat alone in the quiet of my living room, waiting to feel something. Vindication, maybe? Relief? Instead, I felt hollow, as though the confession had carved out something inside me, rather than filling a void. That night, my phone rang. Ryan's name on the screen. I almost didn't answer, but something made me swipe to accept the call. His voice was different than I had ever heard it. Stripped of the entitlement that had always colored his words, the assumption that the world would arrange itself around his needs. I'm not calling to ask for your kidney, he said. I'm calling because there's something you need to know before you decide anything. I waited, my heart beginning to beat faster. I knew about the ICU. My chest tightened so suddenly I couldn't breathe. Mom told me about a year after it happened. She was drunk, crying, saying she had made a terrible mistake, that she ignored the hospital calls, that she couldn't forgive herself for choosing my party over you. He paused. The next morning, she acted like the conversation never happened, and I let her for 9 years. And you never said anything. My voice came out flat, emotionless, though inside I was screaming. For 9 years you knew, and you never said a word to me. I tried. His voice cracked. I wrote emails I never sent. I called you once at 2 a.m, heard your voice when you answered and panicked. Hung up without saying anything. At Michelle's wedding, I walked right up to you, ready to finally tell you the truth, and I just couldn't do it. Why? The silence that followed was long and painful. Because admitting I knew meant admitting that everything I had came from taking what should have been yours. The money, the attention, Mom's love. I built my whole life on your invisibility, Allison, and I was too much of a coward to face it. I didn't know what to say. 9 years. He had carried this knowledge for 9 years, while I struggled alone, while I questioned my own sanity, while I tried to convince myself that maybe I was the problem. I'm not asking you to forgive me, he said quietly. I'm just asking you to know the truth before you make your choice. I hung up without responding. The next morning, I flew to Portland. My mother was preparing to sell her apartment to pay for Ryan's medical care, and she had agreed to let me look through my father's belongings. She met me at the door with the key to a storage unit across town, her face tight with something I now recognized as fear. The storage unit was small and dusty, crammed with the accumulated debris of decades. 3 boxes sat in the corner, labeled in my mother's handwriting, David's things. I opened them methodically, one by one. Old photographs I had never seen, images of my father as a young man, smiling in ways I barely remembered. His watch, the one he wore every day until he died. Journals filled with his handwriting, thoughts and observations I would read later alone in my hotel room. a shirt that somehow still smelled faintly like him after 23 years, and I held it to my face and breathed in the ghost of the only parent who had ever truly loved me. At the bottom of the third box, buried under everything else, as though someone had deliberately hidden it, I found an envelope, yellowed with age, unsealed but clearly never opened by its intended recipient, and written on the front in my father's careful handwriting were the words, "For Allison, to be read when you turn 18. My hands trembled as I pulled out the letter inside. "My dearest Allison," it began. "I know your mother doesn't love you the way she loves Ryan. I've watched it for years, the way she looks past you, the way your achievements go unnoticed, while his failures are forgiven. It breaks my heart, and I'm ashamed that I never stopped it. I had to stop reading, my vision blurred with tears. I've set up a trust fund for you, $25,000 to be yours when you turn 25. Don't let anyone take it from you. Don't let anyone tell you it doesn't exist. You were never the problem, Allison. You were the best part of my life. I love you, always." "Dad." I sat on the cold concrete floor of that storage unit and cried in a way I hadn't cried since I was 12 years old, standing alone at his funeral while everyone comforted Ryan. For 23 years, I had believed I was invisible, unloved, the child no one chose. But my father had seen me. He had written it down. He had tried to protect me from beyond the grave. And my mother had found this letter and buried it along with everything else. She hadn't just stolen my money, she had stolen the only proof I had ever been loved. In the days that followed, I expected support, understanding. Finally, people would see what had been done to me. Instead, Aunt Patricia called to tell me that while what Linda did was terrible, she was still my mother, and hadn't she suffered enough? Cousin Michelle texted that holding on to anger only hurt me, and maybe it was time to be the bigger person. Even Uncle Robert said my father had believed in forgiveness and wouldn't want me carrying this bitterness. My mother texted daily. She lit candles at church. She told me Ryan missed his sister. She said she knew I would do the right thing because I always did. I stopped sleeping, stopped eating properly. At 2 a.m, I called Diane, my mentor, the only person who had never asked me to be smaller than I was. "Everyone says I should forgive, that I'm being bitter, that holding on to anger only hurts myself." My voice broke. "Am I wrong? Am I the villain here?" Diane was quiet for a moment. "Has your mother ever truly apologized? Not excuses, not explanations. A real apology where she took full responsibility." I thought about it. No, never. Then what exactly are you supposed to forgive? You can't forgive something that hasn't been acknowledged. That's not forgiveness. That's amnesia. After we hung up, I read my father's letter again. "Don't let anyone take it from you, not even your mother." He wasn't talking about money, he was talking about my worth. My right to exist, my right to be loved. Uncle Robert said my father believed in forgiveness, but I was holding my father's actual words. And he didn't ask me to forgive her. He asked me to protect myself from her. The next morning, I called my doctor. "I need to understand all the risks. And then I'm going to make a decision. Not for my mother, not for my brother, not for the family that spent 23 years refusing to see me, for myself. For the first time in my life." The transplant specialist's office was cold and clinical, fluorescent lights humming overhead as she reviewed my medical records. I sat across from her, hands folded in my lap, waiting for the verdict that would help me make the hardest decision of my life. "Ms. Summers, technically you're a viable donor," she began. "But I have to be honest about the risks." She pointed to images on her screen. "The cardiac event you experienced 10 years ago left scarring on your heart muscle. You also have occasional arrhythmia. Day-to-day your function is normal, but major surgery puts significant stress on the cardiovascular system." What does that mean for the transplant? The surgery itself isn't unusually dangerous, but your recovery could be complicated. There's elevated risk of cardiac events during and after the procedure. If something goes wrong, your heart may not handle the stress as well as a healthier patient's would. What's your recommendation? If you were my sister, I'd tell you not to do it. Your cardiac history makes this a risk I wouldn't advise taking. And if there are no other options, then it's your choice, but you should make it with full knowledge of what you're risking. 3 days later, I met my mother and Ryan in a hospital conference room. Neutral territory. They were already seated when I arrived. Ryan looking gaunt from dialysis, my mother clutching her purse like a lifeline. I sat across from them and placed my father's letter on the table. My mother's face went white. "You kept this for 23 years, I said. "You let me believe Dad barely thought about me. You stole his money, and then you stole his words." "Allison, I never meant. I want to understand why. The truth this time." Her hands trembled. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "Your father loved you in a way he never loved me. From the day you were born, I became invisible in my own marriage. Everything was Allison, his little girl, his favorite. So you punished me for it." "I didn't see it as punishment. I saw it as balance. Ryan needed more. You didn't. You were always capable, always fine. I almost died, alone, because everyone decided I was fine." "I know," her voice cracked. "I know." I turned to Ryan. "And you knew for 9 years." He nodded, unable to meet my eyes. "I was a coward." "I'm not here to punish either of you. I'm here to make a decision." The room went silent. Part of me wanted to save you, Ryan. The part that spent 35 years trying to earn a place in this family. And the other part listened to my doctor. She said this surgery poses elevated risk to my heart. She advised against it. My mother leaned forward. "But you could do it?" "Yes, I could. 2 weeks ago I almost said yes because everyone kept telling me it was the right thing, the forgiving thing." I held up my father's letter. "But then I read this again. Dad didn't ask me to sacrifice myself for you. He asked me to protect myself from you." I looked at my mother steadily. "I choose me, not to punish you, but because for 35 years I was taught that my needs didn't matter, that being good meant being small, that love meant sacrifice without question. I'm done. This is the first time I'm choosing what's best for me, and my father would have wanted that." Ryan went on the national transplant waiting list. Average wait 3 to 5 years. He started dialysis 3 times weekly and joined a recovery program for the first time in his life. Not because someone forced him, but because he finally understood the cost of his choices. 3 months later, he sent me a letter, not asking for anything, just apologizing. I read it. Didn't respond, but I kept it. For my mother, I filed a civil lawsuit, breach of fiduciary duty. The evidence was overwhelming: tax returns, bank records, her confession witnessed by family on that video call. The court found her liable and ordered repayment of the $25,000 plus interest, plus damages for intentional concealment. She would be making payments until 77. She sold her apartment, her car, everything. But the money was never the point. The point was the public record. Official recognition that what she did was wrong. The narrative she controlled for 23 years was no longer hers to control. I took every dollar of that settlement and established the David Summers Memorial Scholarship for first-generation college students with no one advocating for them. The money my father left me stolen and recovered now, helping other invisible children find their way. I don't disappear from my family completely. Contact is minimal now on my terms. A text on major holidays, nothing more. I don't need their love anymore. I have proof I was always worthy of it. Being the strong one was never a compliment. It was permission for everyone to stop checking on me. I spent 35 years wearing strength like armor, not realizing armor isn't strength. It's survival. Real strength is being able to say, "I needed you, you weren't there, and that wasn't okay." They called me selfish for having conditions, but no one called my mother selfish for ignoring 47 calls. Funny how selfish only applies to the person who finally stops giving. Forgiveness is a gift you give yourself. But it's your gift to give, not something others can demand on someone else's behalf. My mother never truly apologized. She never took responsibility. You can't forgive what hasn't been acknowledged. That's not healing. That's amnesia. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, I walk through my Seattle neighborhood and pass a small bookstore, the kind my father used to take me to when I was little. I go inside, browse the shelves, buy a novel I'll probably never finish. I sit by the window with coffee and watch people walk by. I am alone. But for the first time in 35 years, alone doesn't mean abandoned. It means free. My father's letter didn't save my life, but it saved something more important. It saved me from spending the rest of my life trying to earn love from people who were never going to give it. For 23 years, I thought I was invisible, unworthy, the child no one chose. But I was never invisible. I was hidden. By a woman who couldn't stand that her husband loved his daughter more than he loved her. She hid his money. She hid his letter. She hid the truth, but she couldn't hide it forever. And now finally I'm free. Not because I got revenge. Not because I won. Because I finally did what my father asked me to do 23 years too late. I stopped letting them take it from me. All of it, my worth, my peace, my life. It's mine now, and I'm never giving it back. Thank you for staying with me through Allison's story. Before you go, I want to share some thoughts that I hope will stay with you long after this video ends. Being the strong one in your family is not always a blessing. Sometimes it becomes the excuse others use to stop caring for you, to stop checking in, to stop seeing you as someone who also needs love and support. If you have been labeled the strong one your whole life, please hear this. You are allowed to need people. You are allowed to ask for help. You are allowed to say that something hurt you even if everyone expected you to handle it alone. Forgiveness is a beautiful thing, but it cannot be forced or demanded. True forgiveness requires acknowledgement, responsibility, and genuine change from the person who caused the harm. If someone hurts you and never truly apologizes, you are not obligated to pretend it never happened, just to make others comfortable. Protecting your peace is not selfish. It is necessary. And perhaps most importantly, your worth is not determined by how useful you are to others. You deserve love simply because you exist, not because of what you can give or sacrifice. If the people in your life only remember you when they need something that is not love, that is convenience. You deserve better. If this story touched your heart, if you saw yourself in Allison or someone you know, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. We share stories like this every week, stories about strength, survival, and finding your voice. I would love to hear from you in the comments below. Have you ever been the invisible child in your family? Have you ever been called strong when you were actually struggling? Share your experience with our community. Your story matters, and you are not alone. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.